It was a Friday afternoon. My son and his family were heading off on a weekend road trip. Just before they left, my grandson clung to me, pouting as he pleaded for me to take good care of his cat. I chuckled and reassured him. Go have fun. I'll make sure everything's fine. After refilling the cat's food and cleaning out the litter box, a gust of wind sent a fine layer of dust swirling off the countertop. I sighed, picked up a cloth and started wiping it down. The photo album sat on the coffee table in the living room. I flipped it open absent-mindedly, expecting to see pictures of my grandson. But it wasn't his photo collection. It looked more like a travel journal. The backgrounds in each photo varied. Mountains, islands, vast grasslands, endless deserts. But the two people in them remained the same. A man and a woman, silver-haired yet full of life, stood together in every frame, holding each other close, their smiles vibrant and unburdened. From Switzerland to sun-drenched beaches, from rolling plains to boundless deserts. Through all 4 seasons across the country. My fingers trembled so badly I nearly dropped the album. The most recent photo showed them standing before a waterfall, cascading from the clouds in a sheer ribbon of white. Their fingers were interlocked, one in a blue shirt, the other in a matching blue dress. The rugged cliffs and misty gorge behind them only made them seem more ethereal, as though untouched by time. Despite the fine lines etched across their faces, they still looked like a perfect pair. On the back of the photo, a handwritten note read, Damon and Alice, September 2023. I knew that handwriting. It was Damon's. My husband of nearly 40 years. And Alice, his first love, the one he had never been able to have as his wife. I remember that blue shirt. Last September, before Damon left for an out-of-town seminar, I had personally ironed each of his shirts, making sure they were crisp and neat, including this one. I flipped through more pages. Each photo had a date, one for every year, an unbroken timeline stretching back decades. Occasionally there were handwritten notes on the back, lines of poetry, fleeting thoughts scribbled in Damon's unmistakable script. I turned the pages faster, my vision blurring. The oldest photo, buried at the bottom, had yellowed with time, the years pressing down on it like a tangible weight. The two of them looked so young. A snow-capped mountain loomed behind them. On the back he had written, If one day we stand in the snow together, then in this life, we have already grown old side by side. Damon and Alice, November 2005. The ink had faded, but the strokes were still bold, strong, like a blade slicing through water. Yes, from youth to old age, from dark hair to silver strands, how could they not be considered lifelong companions? And yet, how absurd. My husband, Damon, 65 years old, a highly respected medical scholar, had spent an entire month every year not at academic conferences, but traveling the world with his first love. From the age of 40 to 65. A fire ignited inside my chest, searing through my organs, burning so fiercely it hurt to breathe. And yet, at the same time, it felt as if a gust of freezing wind had blown through me, rendering my limbs numb and my eyes too heavy to keep open. I wanted to call Damon right then and there, to demand an explanation, to force him to tell me why. Why had he hidden this from me for 25 years? But as soon as I reached for my phone, my strength abandoned me. My fingers turned ice cold and tears spilled onto the floor like a broken string of pearls. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the world was suddenly cast into shadow. I sank onto the floor, staring blankly ahead. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. How had my life turned out like this? The night deepened. Damon called multiple times, urging me to come home. I slid the photo album into my bag and set off, walking slowly. A 10-minute journey stretched into half an hour. When I finally arrived, Damon was seated at his desk, focused on his work, typing out a report with the same unwavering concentration he had always possessed. Even in old age, his posture remained straight, his movements deliberate and precise. Seeing me, he glanced up. What took you so long? What were you so busy with? Dinner's not ready yet. I looked at the empty dining table, at the cold and lifeless kitchen. And suddenly I laughed. If I don't cook, will you never think to do it yourself? He raised an eyebrow, surprised. What's gotten into you? Bad mood? Did our son upset you again? If you're not feeling up to it, we can eat out. I'll make a reservation. He closed his laptop and walked toward the entryway to change his shoes. Actually, I have to leave town again next week. You'll have to hold down the fort here alone. He glanced at me. Come on, no need to cook tonight. Let's go. I watched him, the familiar features, the gentle expression. Age had left its mark on him, but his eyes were still warm, still the same as they had always been. And then I asked, "Can you not go?" He stopped, looking at me in surprise. What? My voice trembled. I mean, don't go. Not just this time. From now on. No more trips. His brows furrowed. What are you talking about? This is my job. You know that. Professors at my level are expected to travel for lectures. You're 65, Damon. My voice was barely above a whisper. And are you really just going to give lectures? You don't have to go anymore. You know that. He stilled, studying me with a strange expression. What exactly are you trying to say? His voice held a note of disbelief. Are you accusing me of something? My work trips are public knowledge. You see the reports, don't you? Yes, every year whenever Damon traveled for academic conferences, there were always news articles covering his seminars. That was why, for 25 years, I had never doubted him. I had always thought he's already so busy, so exhausted. The least I could do was take care of things at home, make sure he had nothing to worry about. That's what marriage was, wasn't it? Supporting each other. Damon and I had never had a grand, earth-shattering romance. But we had treated each other with respect, with quiet companionship. In 40 years of marriage we had never even had a serious argument. I had thought, that was love too. I looked up and met his gaze, seeing the irritation and anger flash in his eyes. For a moment, a wave of disappointment crashed over me. I slowly pulled the album from my bag and said, Damon, is this what you find amusing? His eyes widened in shock, and in a split second he snatched the album from my hands, his voice rising sharply. You're going through my things? Julia, after all these years, this is what you've become? I can't believe you're like this. He was flustered, his tone defensive. Alice and I, sure, we had some feelings when we were young. But now we're just old classmates catching up. Doesn't everyone have the right to reminisce about their youth? And what do you think we're capable of at our age? Julia, you're being completely unreasonable. I had seen Damon's back countless times over the years. The young man in his white coat stepping into the operating room, the late nights spent hunched over his desk writing reports, each of them a familiar etched image. But now the last thing I saw was him storming out the door, his back stiff with anger. A cold, hollow feeling gnawed at my insides. I realized then for the first time that Damon and I were in the middle of a silent war. That night he returned very late. The house was quiet, the dining table still, the lights dim. Without a word, he slammed the door to his study. For the next few days I stopped cooking and washing his clothes. The dining table was set for one, only my meal. He went about his day in silence, leaving early and returning late. His dirty laundry piled up in a basket, and the once neatly folded shirts were now thrown in, wrinkled and neglected. When my son's family returned from their trip, they came by to have dinner with me. Grandma, look, this is the gift I brought back for you. It's for you and Grandpa. My 7-year-old grandson, Neil, cheerfully handed me the gift. I smiled faintly, ruffling his hair. Thank you, my dear. Neil, finish your meal and go play in your room, my daughter-in-law Monica gently suggested, then turned to me with a tentative voice. Julia, how have you and Damon been? Is everything okay? I lowered my gaze, my fork moving mechanically through my food. My son Lucas couldn't hold back any longer. Mom, what's going on with you? His voice held clear frustration. Yeah, that album was left at our house on purpose, he continued, not realizing the sting in his words. It was to keep you from getting upset when you saw it. You're really making a big deal out of this. You're so old, Mom. Why care about something like this? Dad's done so much for our family and now he's older. Looking back on the past is just natural. I've met Alice. She's reasonable and understanding. They're just reminiscing. Why do you have to be so hard on them? His voice droned on, but I remained silent. Between his rants, I quietly picked up his favorite dish and poured it into the trash. Lucas stared at me wide-eyed in disbelief. Mom, are you crazy? What are you doing? Monica quietly tugged at his sleeve, but he was fuming now. He slammed his utensils onto the table. Fine. If you won't even let me eat, then don't bother coming to me ever again. I don't need you to come around and try to look after us or else. He stormed out, dragging Monica and Neil with him. Neil, still in his room reading, was yanked along abruptly, his eyes welling up with tears. In that moment I couldn't help but think of Lucas when he was Neil's age, how he would lift his little face to mine, promising to buy me the best things in the world when he grew up. How people change. Even the children you raise with your own hands. When Lucas was small, Damon had been so consumed with work that it was me who took care of him day in and day out. Back then I was the one he loved most, the one he turned to. Now that his father had reached the peak of his career, able to protect him and pave the way for his future, I was no longer the center of his world. In the dead of night I went to the bathroom and saw Damon crouching in front of the washing machine, staring blankly at the buttons as if he couldn't figure them out. He looked up at me, his lips parted but words unspoken. I turned to head back to my room but he called after me, his voice thick with unspoken frustration. "Talia, my clothes are dirty. I have no clean clothes to wear." I shook my head, walked over and pressed the button to start the washing machine. The water began to flow. "I'm sorry, Julia. I've lied to you all these years. It's my fault." His voice was small now, the weight of his confession bearing down on him. "But you have to believe me, I never wanted to destroy our family." I looked at him for a long time, my breath escaping in a soft sigh. Maybe we should separate." He snapped his head up, his eyes cloudy, filled with a strange, bitter light. After that confrontation with Damon, I felt as if a knot in my chest had finally loosened. The fog that had clouded my mind lifted, leaving me startlingly clear-headed. Damon and I were 5 years apart in age, introduced through mutual friends. Back then he was a freshly graduated medical student and I was just an ordinary office worker. I knew he had been in a 3-year relationship during college, one that had ended abruptly when the woman's parents opposed their union. When he told me about Alice, he laid everything bare. His past, their love, and their separation. He said it was all behind him, that he was ready to move forward. I believed him. I nodded and together we stepped into marriage. That was 40 years ago. When Damon was still a medical intern, nearly all his time was consumed by work. He had to assist in surgeries, collect research data, take on clinical shifts, and endure endless overnight duties. That meant everything else fell on my shoulders. His salary was meager then and I didn't dare quit my job. I worked during the day and at night I cared for both our young child and his ailing mother. Even in her final days, it was me who sat by her bedside, holding her hand, witnessing her last breath. I still remember the moment Damon rushed home from the hospital, his hands trembling as he grasped mine. "Julia, I don't know what I would do without you." Later, when his career started gaining momentum, life gradually became easier. I thought that was it, the hardships behind us, a future of steady companionship ahead. But in the year I turned 60 and Damon 65, we finally reached the end of the road. Before I retired, I was an accountant. I had spent my entire life sorting through numbers, reconciling endless accounts. And yet, in the end, the last balance sheet I ever managed was the division of assets from my 40-year marriage. I moved into a small apartment I owned, leaving the divorce papers for Damon. He held that thin sheet of paper for a long time, saying nothing. I told him, "It's okay. I'll give you a month. Think it over." As I packed, I threw away so many old things. Things I had clung to for decades but never truly needed. And the moment they landed in the trash, I felt an unexpected sense of liberation. When Lucas found out I had filed for divorce, he flooded my phone with dozens of messages. Every single one blamed me for being impulsive, selfish, irresponsible. I ignored them all. Perhaps my decision had shaken him too much. After I moved out, not once did he come to see me. For the first time in 60 years, I had vast, open stretches of time to myself. After 2 days of rest, I booked a flight to Hawaii and spent an entire month by the ocean, letting the sea breeze carry away the remnants of my past. Without the need to budget every penny, I discovered something new. Traveling, when done freely, was truly a joy. I took pictures of the places I visited, and, following the lead of younger people, I posted them online. To my surprise, the photos garnered an outpouring of likes, including one from Damon. He even left a comment. "Julia, have fun. Stay safe." Mutual friends chimed in, their responses filled with admiration, showering us with words of envy for our seemingly strong, enduring bond. Damon also sent me messages, asking where certain things were in the house, sharing photos of the pasta he had attempted to cook, reminding me to wear sunscreen. I didn't respond to a single one, and for the first time I felt nothing at all. No anger. No grief. Not even the ripple of a single emotion. But when I returned from my trip, I was greeted by an unexpected visitor. When Alice came looking for me, it finally hit me, something was off. Damon had told me he was leaving for another trip the following week. Yet more than a month had passed and he was still here. So, was it because he had broken his promise to Alice this year that she had come all the way to find me? She sat gracefully across from me, a soft smile on her lips. Her dress was impeccably tailored, exuding quiet elegance. Though age had touched her face, her demeanor held the refined composure that only years could bestow. Compared to her, I must have seemed like a simple old woman, plain and unadorned. People say that what you cannot attain in your youth will haunt you for a lifetime. And if that unattainable thing is a person, no wonder Damon had spent his whole life seeing her as his one true love. "Julia, is it?" she said, her smile warm, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." She took a delicate sip of her coffee and continued, "I'm truly sorry that you and Damon have had a falling out because of me." I didn't respond. She remained composed, unbothered as she continued speaking in a measured, soothing tone. "Julia, you really don't have to be upset over this. Damon and I were simply